Hi, everybody. I'm Ralph Ben-Murky. Welcome to Not That Kind of Rabbi. By the way, I have new blog posts that are available on our Patreon account, patreon.com/NTKR. If you're interested in supporting the podcast, I'm interested in having your support, so that'd be a wonderful thing. What a strange time. One of my blog posts, I wrote it this morning, and I was really thinking about in Lytton, British Columbia, mostly Indigenous community, the temperature rose to 49.5 degrees Celsius. 49.5 degrees Celsius. And nobody should be surprised because the earth is slowly but surely catching fire. Australia last year just literally caught fire. A continent caught fire. The west coast of the United States. The prairies right now in Canada are parched, ready to be scorched. Animals are dying. People are dying. Over 700 sudden deaths in British Columbia happened in the last week. And yet, as somebody pointed out, if your paycheck depends on continuing the status quo, then you're not going to want to change the status quo. It's your paycheck. So it's not going to be up to individuals to sort their stuff into blue bins and green bins, and that's not going to help anyone in this situation. But one thing that I find is a gaping hole is any sense of a large movement for eco-spirituality. That if this is the creation, and we are supposed to be in service to that creation, then we're on the wrong track. It's often quoted that man has dominion over nature in biblical texts. I don't go that way. That's a pyramid, and we're at the top, and everything serves us. It's like when people shoot bears in Banff when they build a subdivision. Well, there was a bear in our subdivision. Yeah, no, you were in the bear's subdivision. You killed it because it got in your way. So we're completely numb to what's going on around us. And spiritually, we don't, it's particularly in Western religious practices, very little connection. We should exist in a circle of an ecosystem in which we appear occasionally in relationship and in balance with others, in stewardship. And there's a lot of talk about, a lot of lip service about seventh generation thinking in white Canada. But it doesn't exist. Seventh generation thinking doesn't exist in white Canada. So what we really have is an extractive kind of economics where we take from the earth as much as we possibly can, and we take from people as much as we possibly can to benefit the few. And we have to find a way to get our way out of this. And I think, clergy, I just did a session with some clergy, Christian clergy, who were wanting someone to facilitate a conversation about the fact that their pews have emptied out, that people aren't coming anymore. And they're not quite sure what the value proposition of a brick and mortar church is for them. And I think until we start addressing the existential angst and anxiety that, pandemic aside, this will be the global crisis that will consume much of what we're doing in the next 15 years. Until we do something with that and find a way to say that we have the humility to bend our knee to the unbelievable awe of creation and therefore respect and treat it with respect, we're not going to be able to get out of this thing. You can't buy your way out of climate change at this point, but you can find a way to have an eco-spiritual movement that includes everybody in a walk together. So I just wanted to share that because I've spent some of my life, I'd say the last 13 years of my life, really trying to figure out how to communicate the climate crisis to people. And I feel like it doesn't matter, they're not listening. It's like, but it's a nice day today. What does it matter? I hope somehow we find our tipping point a lot faster than we're going to at the present rate of speed, which is not fast at all. So there's my thought for you for the people of Lytton, BC, who, by the way, after it was 46.5%, 49.5 Celsius, the entire town just caught fire and disappeared. So either we figure this out or we suffer the consequences. All that said, I stumbled upon my guest for the podcast today while looking at some things online, and I absolutely love her story. So I wanted you to meet her, and I wanted to spend some time with her. Her name is Nakuset, and she is with me from Montreal, if I'm correct. Hi.
Yep. Hi.
How are you?
Tired.
Are you often tired?
Yeah, I mean, just the other day, I was able to put together a honoring Indigenous children march in Montreal, and I wasn't sure how many people would show up, and we had 10,000. So I'm still tired from that because I wasn't expecting that many. But what I wanted to do was get traditional speakers together to give some wisdom and some like we had Kevin Deere, and what you had just shared, he shared a very similar message, right? But more
Mm.
from an Owe perspective. Um, and it's the feedback that I received were that, the non-Indigenous people that showed up found it, really humbling, and were very thankful to receive these messages because, all the different sort of realities facing Indigenous people is really difficult. And unless we try to find some way of sort of healing and having some kind of grasp on the situation and sort of figuring out how to move forward, then we sort of freeze up. And I didn't want that for the community, and I didn't want that for the non-Indigenous community too, because they're feeling like, well, we want to do something and we're not sure what we should do. And just listening was awesome. Yeah.
What
So,
was it like to see 10,000 people show up for you?
um, I mean, it's hard to sort of wrap your head around it, right? Because when I started, I showed up an hour early and people were slowly coming in. And then I was sort of sitting on the steps. I was at the Jean Mance Park near the big statue. And, I had like three other people that helped me do this, Jaggy Singh, Jen Jerome, and Amy Streamer. So what we did was we kind of coordinated all the media interviews ahead of time every 10 minutes. So I was sitting down, and then when I stood up, that's when I saw the crowd of people. And then I just jumped right into it. So I didn't even introduce myself. I was just like task oriented, like bring on each speaker, and making sure that that everything was well coordinated. And then when you see 10,000, you're thinking this could be a disaster if people aren't following the protocols and going where they need to go. And everything was so peaceful. And that was, the police actually helped us, which I have to give them kudos because that's not always our experience with them, but they helped us sort of guide people. It was very emotional. We had a lot of really like amazing singers like Lissa P. Isaac, Sylvia Cloutier, and their songs, just made people cry because they were about the children. So we needed a time to sort of come together and grieve, but also a time to sort of like get ready because there's more coming. So I'm not quite sure I'm going to do the next time. Like I know any day now they're going to be talking about, another mass grave, and I won't like I'll have to figure it out once I get there what I'm going to do, because I was obviously like very affected. I mean, I'm from Saskatchewan, right? So when they found, the 715 children, they could be my relatives, right? Like,
Yeah,
so anyway, I'm just rambling.
not really. Um, if this is rambling, you ramble on, my friend. Ramble on.
Well, I'm sure you have like specific questions for me, right?
You
So
know, I've been interviewing people for 35 years, and what I've learned is to just be present with the person you're with, as opposed to, oh, thank you, question three, because you stop listening. It's like what you said when the elders shared wisdom at the event. you're either listening or you're not. And if you're not,
Mhm.
then it's just a big party and an event and look at us and we're here. But some of that wisdom, I hope, could be what was impactful for you in the wisdom that you heard? I know you were running
You know, we
around, but
Yeah, no, I was standing right next to him. What was really difficult was he had his water drum and he had his turtle shell. So he was holding both of them. So I was holding the microphone to his face and he kept moving around. So I was like, it was really difficult. I was like, I don't know how I got into this. So I was totally there. But what I liked was how people wear the color orange, to commemorate. He put that in relation to fire, and all these spirits are like fire, and they've all sort of risen now in terms of people know that they exist, right? So I thought that was really, really great. And he also talked about the fact that, he saw that if we don't do better, that we will basically all die. If we don't, start taking care of the environment, if we don't start, listening to the teachings. And I know you mentioned this, the seventh generation, and that is something. And what's kind of interesting about the seventh generation is they say that my generation, the 60 scoop generation, the generation that was taken away and found their way back, that they will, be part of leading the way. So when we talk about the seventh generation, they talk about trying to put the earth in a good place, not for your first or your second, but the next 7 generations. And I've been running the Native Women's Shelter now for over 20 years. Well, no, I've been the executive director since 2004, but I've been there since 1999. And it's stepping stones. It's like I wasn't, incredibly successful at the beginning, but as time came on, I was able to make more change within the shelter, more programming, and then it just sort of rippled out into the community where I have multiple projects. And I just opened another shelter called Resilience Montreal, and we just got 7.2 million from the provincial and federal government. And I'm like, I don't know if I can do this again. It's
well,
really kind of.
it's something interesting as you were talking about your time in this organization was perhaps within a lifetime itself, there are 7 generations of growth in a person. You know, perhaps there's that too, that the person you were, and then the person you become, and then the person you become, and then the person you become, right? Never
You
thought of it
know,
before.
I know that, just in December, the Montreal Gazette featured me as people to watch for, right? That's like the name of the article. They do it every year. So first I was like, okay, that sounds stockish. Watch for, like, I'm pretty shy and like I don't really anyway. And then it says something about Nakuset and she gets things done. And then I'm wondering, is this like a self-fulfilling prophecy? Because after that came the 7.2 million. And, we also did like this really big, Justice for Joyce. I did another rally and we had like, I don't know, maybe like 5,000 people that showed up during COVID red zone in Montreal. So that was huge. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm never going to be able to top that. Like I should just retire. And then just, on Thursday, we had 10 million. I'm like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah,
I'm going to have to probably try to do better, right? But it was never my intention to try to have a number. What I did, which was different, was I did a lot of interviews beforehand and I asked for help. I asked for people to come out and support us, and they did in like huge numbers. So I
right.
think when you ask for help, you get it. And that's hard for me to ask for help. I'll do it myself.
Yeah, well, it's hard for a lot of people because
Yeah.
it requires a humility. I don't
Mm.
mean, oh, don't mind me. I mean, it requires you to know where you should be in this. Should I be leading? Should I be asking for help? Should I be doing both? Which one in what order? There's a lot. Humility is the gift of knowing where you are and where you should be, I think. I wanted to talk to you about being taken from your family as a small child and your life growing up in Montreal. Um, if you could just let people know a bit of what your journey has been.
Yeah. Yeah, not a happy story. It's really not a happy story because you have to understand that my mother went to residential school. She went to the Prince Albert Residential School, and her experience shaped her. and she, ended up having 7 children, and all of them were placed into care. But for whatever reason, I was the second to last child. So by then, the 60 scoop sort of happened. And I was in a foster home with my sister Sonia. And we were lucky. We were like, it was great that we were together. But then the social worker came by and took pictures and felt like I was, adoptable. But Sonia, who's 3 years older, had too much, I guess, I don't know, she too much baggage. So she wasn't considered adoptable. So then I left, in the middle of the night. I was taken from, we were in Thompson, Manitoba at the time, to Montreal and put into this new family. I'm just turning 3 years old, and I'm like, what am I doing here? And it was really strange. And I think what was hard was that when I arrived, I already had 3 years of neglect and abuse. So I wasn't a really sweet, bubbly child. I was a guarded and angry and, kind of mute. Like I didn't talk. I was confused. And my parents are like, well, what do we do with this? She was so cute in the picture. She's not so cute now. So there was definitely, sort of like a lot of head scratching. And I
And
guess,
they were Jewish.
yeah, they are. They still are.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But you weren't, but you became.
Yes, yes. Well, that was the thing. I mean, my parents adopted twice. They didn't think they could have children. So they had my brother Neil, and through the same Jewish Family Services, and at that time they were giving out just like white children. But then when the AIM program was established, they took all the pictures of the white children out and said, okay, from now on we're only giving out Native kids, and they do this across Canada, right? So Jewish Family Services had a lot of children that they were sort of giving out. That's how you want to put it. I don't know. But there were also other, like the Ville Marie Child Protection Services also had the same sort of book, and that was sort of distributed around Montreal to, I guess, non-Jewish adoption agencies. So there's a lot of 60 scoop kids, in Montreal, but a lot of them, like I can think of like 15 Jewish Indians, and that's what I call myself. I know people are like, why do you call yourself an Indian? Well, still on my Indian status, right? I'm still have an Indian card, so I don't care. Like, I call myself a Jewish Indian. It's just the way I sort of express myself. So, so I think the social workers didn't really have much knowledge in how to sort of, counsel the parents taking these kids, and they just felt it's part of the assimilation. So, they told my parents, don't tell them anything about her culture. And I had a blonde brother and a blonde sister. So they were like, well, she's dark, so tell her that she's Israeli. And don't encourage her to retrace her steps. So my parents went with that. But they also had very negative thoughts of Indigenous people. So in Montreal, there's a place called Ganawage. And what happened was, during my childhood, I eventually went to this private school that had a large Indigenous. They had a lot of Mohawk kids. And I was like, oh my God, you look like me. I was like, so excited. And then I became friends with a lot of the kids, and I became like a sponge. I'm just like, teach me about the Mohawk, language and your culture. And they were just like, they were kind of like the coolest kids in the school. And I'm like, I'm kind of like you. And I went home one day, and I had picked up the Mohawk sort of accent, and that did not go well. They were like, do not turn into one of those. And my father, who, made quite a bit of money, he had a Mercedes. And you have to understand that Ganawage at that time was not the, very wealthy community it is now. Back then they were going through harder times. So my father drove into Ganawage with his Mercedes, and I had my brother and sister next to me. I have to say I was about 12 years old at this time. And he was like, you want to tell people you're Native? Get out of the car. Go. This is what Native people do. And he would look at one of the houses. He goes, the people here get welfare, and if they never ate, or never bought like clothes, they still could never afford the Mercedes that you're driving in. This is your reality. So you want to be proud of it, get out of the car, live here. And I almost did, except a group of Mohawk people started to follow the car going, you're not from here, so you need to leave. And he drove out. And I remember my brother and sister like kind of turning and looking at me as if like, why do you have to be such a problem? Like, why can't we just? So, there was this sort of cultural shame that I was sort of like, you should just, like have a bat mitzvah. You should, just, go out with Jewish boys, and you should just, like blend and honestly, like none of like I remember I used to go out with a guy who has your last name, and his parents were like mortified when I came over because like she's not a real Jew.
Oh wow.
So like I was like, the Moroccans look like me.
Exactly.
But I was still not really accepted. So anyway,
so there was never, so there's part of you that's being acculturated as a Jew, and there's the other yearning part of you that wants to connect to being Indigenous. This must have been okay. So there's one piece here that makes it all so much better than it could have been, which is your Bubby.
So when I was adopted, my Bubby was around, and she would just like every time I walked into the room, her face would light up. She was like always thrilled to see me. And I was not used to having a family member that like adored me. So we became very close, right? Anytime I needed to talk about something or just needed some positive input or whatever, it was almost like a treat to go and spend time. Sometimes, how my parents would go to Florida during like the holidays, and my Bubby would have a place and we would go there. And that was just like awesome. I was always, very much looking forward to spending time with her. But things were so hard in the household that I had to leave. It got to a point where I knew I was really much a countdown. I knew at 18 I was allowed to leave home. So I was, counting the days. And then when I left, I really kind of was trying to figure out where my road is, what is my direction, what is going on, what do I do? How do I live in a world where, I don't really know my native culture, but do I just forget about it and just blend into society? I like, it was a very confusing time for me. And, after spending many years, after I moved out with my Bubby, she got cancer. She got sick. And she was my only connection. So she decided that we should really make some concrete steps to find my biological family, so that when she passed away, that I would have someone. So we wrote lots of letters, and I had some paperwork I was able to find. My parents kind of covered up all the paperwork, but I was able to figure it out. And I had some links back to my biological family. So we ended up writing to like it's kind of a convoluted story, but I think I had something like 18 brothers and sisters, right? Because my mother had 7, and then my, father had, 11. Oh, so
Oy, indeed.
Yeah.
It's right, Gavalt. Yeah.
So I wrote to all of them, and one person wrote back. One still lived in the same household and remembered me and said, wow, I used to change your diapers as a baby. So this is a brother that I had. His name is Richard Murray. And he was actually kind of the same age as my mother. Okay, so my mother married John Murray. She was a young woman. He had already had 11 children with another Cree woman, and then she passed away. So then he married my mom. So I have like brothers and sisters that people think are my parents. Anyway,
right.
So he was the one who gave me the connection back to Sonia, because Sonia had been devastated when I left, had been looking for me, had the same paperwork, so knew that I was in Montreal and was writing me letters. And she's like, please answer me. And my parents just ripped up the letters.
What were your parents trying to do? Were they trying to say, if you decide that you embrace your Indigenous life, you will have a horrible life, and we don't want that for you? I mean, was it a perverse way of trying to say you'll be better off like this? We
Yeah,
don't
I
want
think
that?
so. I think it's that reverse psychology kind of thing, right? I think they really thought that, if I married a nice Jewish boy, I
Right,
would be in Florida. I would have, like, my parents, you have to understand, they're very wealthy. They just assumed I would like marry into all that. But
right,
I always felt like in their house, which was like a nice, really, beautiful house, that it was like a museum. Like it
right.
was very pretty, don't touch anything. Like I never felt comfortable, like it was like a relief to leave. Like I could not see myself in that world. And some of even the hierarchy were like the men were in charge and the women sort of like never sort of spoke out too much or whatever. It's like, no, I can't, no, can't do it. Right. So it made me be very independent where I'm like, I'm never going to depend on a man. I'm going to, you know, um, always make my own money. I'm going to try to be, independent. And of course, it took many, many years. But, when my Bubby was able to sort of reunite me and my family, it took a couple of years before a little time before I went up to visit them. So I met my biological mom and I met Sonia, which was awesome. And my brother Wayne and my brother Richard, a couple of siblings and cousins, and that was really great. But I live in Montreal, and they still live in like Manitoba and everywhere else throughout sort of the West. And it actually sort of gave me, when I got my Indian status, like you should see the picture, like I am the proudest looking Indian in that picture, getting my Indian status, because my Indian status allowed me to go back and get an education. I didn't have to, knock on my parents' door and be like, please give me some money. I never asked for anything. Once I left that door, I became, I was poor, but, I was on my own. But when I got my Indian status, I went back to school and I got a degree, and I got a degree in human relations, which is like the line I use is, now I can get along with my parents because I have a degree. But
So your parents, are they still, they're both still alive, your adoptive parents? Do you talk with them at all? Not in the least. And your siblings
no,
from that family, you talk to them at all?
no. So I had one brother and one sister. And I think my parents were so insulted that I left. They were like, you're gonna leave us for that?
Right,
They were
right,
just, so I was cut out. I was completely cut out. And the last time I saw them was at my brother Neil passed away. Probably now, Kristen was like 2, so 12 years ago. And it was a cousin that told me, like my parents don't even get in contact with me. So I had to
right.
crash the funeral.
Oh my.
And it was really awkward because people knew who I was, and I'm standing all the way at the back of the end, and people actually got up and let me sit down, whereas all
Oh,
the immediate family was in front. And I talked to my mother and I was like, well, can I come to the Shiva? She's like, nope.
wow.
So I'm like, well, what did I do exactly? Right. Like
Yeah.
it almost seems like the fact that because they used to tell me all the time, you're going to grow up, you're going to be a drug addict, and you're going to be a prostitute because that's what your people do. So I was really sure that was my way. But I think maybe that was the reverse psychology, or I don't know, maybe they were just cruel. I don't know.
Or
But
maybe they just were ignorant about what they'd taken from you and thought, don't you understand? We're doing you this great favor. And you were saying, don't you understand? I need to be me.
yeah,
I can't be a pretend. Is there anything in your life now that resonates from the Jewish side of your life?
I think so for sure, right? I think okay, my adopted father is a very successful businessman. So I must have picked up something there because, I can run an organization and I'm very, I have a staff of, about 25. I used to have a TV show called Indigenous Power, and I used to like, produce and create and write all the scripts and like, that's sort of like, I mean, I'm in a nonprofit business, but I was very organized and very focused and knowing exactly what I need to do and able to sort of implement and all that. So I
And
would
you think
think,
that's kind of a Jewish thing? I sort of see it as it's just he happened to be entrepreneurial and did all those things. But it's almost the same trope that if you're Jewish, you're supposed to be successful and have a lot of money and do things well. And so I don't know if that's much better than saying if someone's indigenous, they're going to be this, they're going to be that. And, like when people
Well,
find out that that there are Jews who live in poverty, that there are Jews that
yeah.
are alcoholic, that are Jews
Yeah.
that abuse their families. They're like, oh, no, not us. And I think, no, of course us. Of course, everybody is us. So
But
is there
I
anything
can,
spiritual that you got from being, from bat mitzvah and Hebrew school and being Jewish?
oh, well, no. Thing is, okay. So, anyways, if I could give my parents any kudos, that was it. And you just took it. You took it from them.
Well,
Sorry.
well, because to me it sounded like, oh, this is the stereotype of what Jews are. Jews are people who are good at
I don't
business.
know. I don't know if that's the stereotype. I mean, the Ben Murgy guy I went out with, he was not rich,
No, but he's
right?
Moroccan like me, so
Oh,
we were working class. We're not
oh,
Ashkenazi Jews. We're the different ones.
oh, okay.
We're
Anyway, so I
we're
don't
the
know if
others.
you can really paint them off one color there. So
No,
that's,
of course not.
yeah.
I'm just
So, but
wondering if there was a spiritual piece from being Jewish, or did that really just sort of never really happen for you?
um,
Like if you went
my
into a
parents used to,
synagogue now
yeah.
and sat there for a high holiday service, would it resonate with you when you heard the shofar
Yes,
blow?
absolutely. No,
Yeah.
no, no. You have to understand that, I went to Hebrew school, like, junior congregation at the Shar Shmaim when I was a little kid. And then usually Friday nights we would go to synagogue. And that was always, even when we lived in Dollard, because they moved to Westmount later on, but we always did that. So I was already sort of put into the culture and I loved it. I thought it was great. I have a lot of respect for the Jewish culture. And, sometimes through the Native Women's Shelter, I still get invited to synagogues just to sort of speak to the congregation about what they can do for Indigenous people. And I'm very comfortable sitting there. It's the only religion that I know. So
Hmm.
I didn't I still consider myself Jewish. I'm not really a practicing Jew, but so I have a story for you, which is kind of funny, but not really funny. But
I'd like to hear that story.
I had a friend. Okay, but anyways, before I go on to that story, my Bubby though,
Yeah.
she was incredibly kind and giving and warm, and all those traits, came, like, I absorbed that because I had a dysfunctional Jewish mother and I had a dysfunctional, Native mother, and none of my parenting skills came from them. Because if they
Right.
did, my kids would be in youth protection now, right?
Right.
But so I take all of that, right, all that kindness that she gave me, right, that that made me a better person. But a friend of mine invited me over for Passover. And when they invited me over for Passover, like, I don't drink alcohol, so they always give, glasses of wine throughout, right, through the Seder. So I'm not drinking the alcohol, and it's a mixed group of, my friend, her husband, other friends, and they're sitting down and they're looking at me and they're like, "Are you sure you're Native? Because you look like you could be a little European. And how come your people, like, the Jewish people were able to, like, survive the Holocaust and sort of get it together? How come your people can't get it together?" And then later on, people were drinking, and then all of a sudden they were like, "Hey, kimosabi."
Oh
I
my
was like,
God.
"I'm not coming back." Like, I
Well,
was like, "I'm out
duh.
of here." And
Wow.
I had a friend who was Native who wanted to come up. I'm like, "No, no, no, no." I'm not. So that was kind of discouraging, but I don't think they did it with ill will, but I didn't feel comfortable. So I'm very, and sometimes, like, now that people know who I am, I feel sometimes like I'm a freak show. Like, what
Right.
is it about you that made you succeed? And of course it's my Bubby, 100%, right?
Right.
Because you have to understand that my biological family has not done well. And even when I found my sister, Sonia, we ended up finding my other sister, Rose, who was younger than me, who was in Europe, and we had a reunion. And the knowledge of everything that was taken away was too much for my sister, Sonia, and she committed suicide almost 3 years ago. And she left me this, like, video where she was like, "If you're watching this, it's because I'm dead, and I need you to be the voice for the 60 Scoop, and I need you to tell people how damaging it is and how I can't relate to my own children because of what happened." And that was,
Hmm.
It's like I don't have a happy story. It's,
Well,
I mean, I get to keep my children, right? Like, and I work as hard as I can. And now I have that extra sort of my sister's dying wish, So what was kind of nice was that I did that documentary and they put a picture of her in it and they didn't realize it was her. It was actually they thought it was me. But I was like, oh, she's in the doc, because what's so hard for me about that documentary was my Bubby led me to Sonia. So my Bubby, who had unconditional love for me, led me to Sonia, and then she died, and then Sonia died. So when I did that doc, it's the realization that those that love me the most are no longer here.
well, they are though. They are in a certain way, like they're part of who you are.
Well, I mean, I believe in the spirit world. So honestly, when I did the march the last week, I smudge, right? So I burn sage, and we use that. The sage is supposed to be your prayers that go all the way up to the creator, so he hears them. So I smudged and I asked for my Bubby and my sister Sonia to be with me that day.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, they say may their memory be a blessing, and that your Bubby and Sonia, who suffered the intergenerational trauma that she couldn't survive, and the insensitivity of the people at that Seder to say we survived. We Everyone who can survive also carries with them the trauma and passes on that trauma. I mean, even your adoptive parents would embody that trauma and say, we're so conditioned that things could go very badly, that look at we've made it, so you can't drag down into that. So everybody has their wounds and how we tend to the wound, and you've been tending to the wound, it would seem, not just through your own personal journey, but you decided to take on a work you didn't need to take on, that you decided to work with women, Indigenous women, and do meaningful work. What has that work brought to your life, do you think? I know it's hard, that work, but what has it brought to your life?
Um, like it's many years that I'm doing it. So it's sort of like creating a path for others so that they can succeed. So what does that look like? And it feels like, because of systemic discrimination, um, that it touches everything. So in terms of like youth protection and the police and the court system and the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in jail and health and everything. So what I try to do is I've really expanded my job description at the shelter, because like it doesn't say anywhere do a march. Like I just do that on my own, right? But like we're able to really create sort of safe spaces within the city. I used to think that at the Native Women's Shelter, when the women came in, I would make them safe. But then I realized that they would have to actually leave. And when they leave, if the world is not safe for them, what can I do? So it's why I have, contribution agreements with the city of Montreal, and I had a collaboration agreement with youth protection and one with the police, and like sort of agreements saying that we're going to get along. They don't usually honor those agreements though. I'm like, come on, you signed it, do something, right? It's a constant struggle, and it's a constant sort of going back to the table and trying to make change. But like we're like in the process now of opening a second stage housing. We started building it in April 26th, just of this year. So it's going to take 18 months, but this is a secondary location. So if you think of the shelter being a crisis, first stage, when you get out of your crisis, you can now go to the second stage housing, where it'll be fully furnished and beautiful apartments and places for women and children or single women. And it'll have like a special room that is for the community, so we can have ceremonies and we can invite guest speakers and trainings for the women. And it'll have the Dr. Julian Foundation. So this is social pediatrics. So I've been working with BACHA for more than 10 years now. BACHA is the English Youth Protection in Montreal. So it's over 10 years that I've been working with them. And I've been trying to sort of create or collaborate with services, or create our own services, or try to change the way it works. And we've basically had the door shut in our face time and time again. And after 10 years of trying to, create something with them, now we're just going to be like, no worries, we'll create it ourselves. Don't hurt yourself, sit down. We'll just do it. So we're creating the Dr. Julian Foundation in the building, and we're going to extend that to the community. So anyone who is having issues with youth protection will now have a team of doctors and lawyers and social workers and whatever it is that they need in order to get that child back. They'll be supported by professionals, and that's going to be better than, like, it's almost like if you have a team of professionals around you when you walk into youth protection is going to be like, oh, we're not going to try to pull the wool over your eyes. We're going to have to actually just follow the mandate, because in our experience, when we lose our children, even if we follow the mandate up to a year, they still don't give the kids back. So it's sort of like, I feel like I only have one life. I am 50 years old, so I'm not going to be around forever. I don't know how much time I have left on this planet. So I have to just try to do the best that I can until I'm called back to, the creator. Like, I don't know how long that's going to be. I'd like to say, it's another, I once saw a psychic and she told me I was going to live to be an old lady, like 90. So anyways, I got 40 years.
Yeah.
So I still have to do as much as I can in the next 40 years, right?
Yeah.
And I think that when you hold a title like executive director, then you got to use that title, because it's almost like a cape. Like, I'm an executive director. I want to talk to your executive director, and we need to, it's more of a serious titles. But I truly use it to the best of my abilities, right? And people ask me to talk a lot, right? Nathan, he was friends with, he used to be partners with Anthony Bourdain, Nathan Thurnberg. He has a podcast, and I was the first native person that he interviewed from Canada. I will always say yes to these kind of things, because one day nobody's going to care about listening to me. So thanks.
So, so I'm trying to, one of the things that I've always found difficult is how to, I have a few friends who are Indigenous, and I always say, I don't know how we cross the bridge to be together on the things we need to be together on, because there's so much justifiable mistrust of the other in the Native community, in the Indigenous community. There's so much of, here they come, it can't be good. That how do you become how can people like me become effective allies? Like, one thing, okay, here's one thing that has driven me nuts. I've worked with certain politicians over the years, and I remember when it became really in fashion to do a land acknowledgement. And I really found myself going, so now you get up and you say, I want to say that we're on the lands of the Mississauga of the first, and of the new credit, and I just think, so what? So you've said that, it's out of the way. Now let's get on with business. And I found that I think if I was Indigenous, I would have said, never mind. Acknowledging that it's unceded territory and that you broke the treaty is not exactly the way to start, and then let's eat. It doesn't really help. So how do people on the other side of this, the other Canadians, how do we end up being able to walk home with you? How do we do that?
There's so many ways. And I always ask people to go with what their strength is, right? So you don't want me to do your bookkeeping, because I'm not good with numbers, right? So, but I mean, the idea of just doing it sort of in a small way. So if you are, wherever you live, if there is, an Indigenous organization, why don't you volunteer? Why don't you, if you can donate money or do a fundraiser? If you see homeless people that are on the street, and most homeless people, at least in Montreal, we're the highest population that are on the street, the smallest population in Quebec. If you see someone there, why don't you like offer them a sandwich or a gift card or say hello? Because usually people just walk by really, really quickly. Why don't schools, sort of get together and either do like baking or some kind of thing where they go into the streets and they feed the people on the streets, right? Because there's sort of this like fear of the homeless that they're going to come out and hurt you, but most of the time they are so grateful. So with my kids, I do that all the time. We go downtown and take them to go see like a movie or to buy clothes or whatever. We go out for lunch, and whatever is left over, we go into the metros, and my kids run around the metro and they start they're so funny. They run around and they start evaluating the people that are on the ground, going, that one looks like he has a job, don't give it to him. That one looks like he's having a hard time, give him the food. And the look on the face of the people that receive the food, they're so happy and so grateful, right? So my kids sort of get like, wow, I've done something good. And they as well get to eat, because it's really hard to like be on the streets. Then there's the TRCs, like, please read them. They have like a section that's, if you don't want to read the entire thing, they have sort of just like the 94,
right,
sort of short little ones. You can read that. You can look to see why people, like the TRCs were made for institutions. They were not made for Indigenous people. Every institution is supposed to read them and apply them. Ask people why they're not. If you work in a hospital, are you applying those TRCs? Or if you work in a hospital, are you applying Joyce's principle, right? Then in like Quebec, they have the 142 recommendations for the Viens Commission. Anyone doing anything about it? Okay, so maybe, Ian Lafreniere, who's the Minister of Secretariat des Affaires Autochtones, he's doing some, but mostly people aren't. Why not? Like, why do we have all these reports made out to us? Like, I testified for 3 days at the Viens Commission. So I took, a lot of risk to go and to, it takes a lot of effort, and they do a report and they put it on a shelf. Same thing for missing and murdered. 231 calls to justice. They don't call it recommendations. I think if you call it calls to justice, it's going to make people do something. Ignored. So starting to look into things like that, it depends how much time you have on your hands. The easy thing to do is to support the organizations that are doing the work. Mm-hmm. And if you have the capacity to do more, then do more, because, you are on Indigenous land, right? And it is a gift to be here, and you don't have to be here. You can take that boat and go back, right? But you're here. So when you're here, help us out a little bit. Doesn't have to be like going to Attawapiskat and getting them clean water. Yeah. But if you know how to, please help, because it's 10 years that they don't have clean water, and it's horrible how we're living like in a third world country.
Well, it's environmental racism is what it is.
Yeah, I don't know how I get out of bed some days. It's like,
well, everything is how do you get out of bed? Like,
well, some days are harder than others, right? I mean, I'm just you know what? And I feel like a lot of people also depend on me, because like even for this last March, I didn't have the energy to do it. But people were writing, and I had already done something for the 215 at the mountain. Just, it was very, it was more just sort of organic in terms of inviting people with drums to come and sing. And people were like, can you do that again? And I was like, I don't know. Can I? Okay. And then I talked to one of my colleagues, Marty Miller, and she was like, yeah, you should do it. You should do it on July 1st. And just like that, I'm like, okay, I can do it. And then I bring in, like really strong volunteers that have the capacity to do it. And then we just plow through, right? So you kind of have to step up, and it's not easy, but it's never been easy for us, right? And and I have children, and I want to be like a good role model for my children. And I want to make sure that it's going to be easier for them, when they get older, because, I got 14, 11, and 8. So they're still quite young. When I did the Justice for Joyce, I brought my 14-year-old, and he was thrilled. He was so proud to be there, to meet all the speakers. His job was to clean the microphone and give it to the next speaker, but he really enjoyed it. So I try to bring them to do more advocacy work with me, just so that they can see it. And my middle son, Makisis, he wants to do what I do for a living. He wants to run a shelter. So that's good, right? But they don't have to. They can do whatever they want.
I mean, look, we all get dealt our hand, and for some of us it's too much, and we don't really we can't really get above it. And for others, we survive. And for others, we succeed and thrive in a certain way. And, what you pass on to your children, the trauma that was passed on to you, for a lot of us, I think it's just, how do I minimize as best I can that ability to pass on trauma and maximize the ability to pass on hope and inspiration. And when you spoke of Sonia and you spoke of your Bubby, those pieces, they're physically gone, but I can feel them just listening to you. That there has to be a life that means something, that you're not just here to take up space, that you have to do something, and you do something. And I'm sure it takes a hell of a lot out of you, but then every once in a while, I'm sure you look up and see the work of helping a woman and her children, to go back into society not as broken as when you got them. That's not nothing. That's a major mitzvah. That's a wonderful and beautiful thing. So I just want to thank you, Grace. I find your story so inspiring for me. And I think that there's so much to learn from everything and everyone that you've been in contact with. And I just hope that, that you take care of yourself in a way that allows you to do the work efficiently without having to give up everything. And, that's the Jewish side. It's okay. Standing's good. I just wanted to look at you. But Mom, you walked all the way across the desert. It's okay. So take good care of yourself, please. And I thank you on behalf of a whole bunch of people for doing work that others, as you say, can walk right by the people who need them and not even stop to even smile. So you don't have any pocket change and you don't have a sandwich, but you can say hello. You can be a decent human being, and that's our only job, right? To be a mensch, to be a decent human being in this life, which is no mean feat, and even all of us have our moments where we don't get there. But thank you so much for doing this with me. I really appreciate it.
Great. Hello.
and stay away from Ben Murgie's there.
He was a nice guy. He was such a nice guy. I think he became a lawyer.
Was he French or Spanish?
I remember him speaking French and Hebrew. I don't remember so much, but maybe Spanish. It was a long time. Like I was like 15.
Do you remember where he was from in Morocco?
Oh God, no.
Because we're from Tangiers, so we're Spanish. And
I don't
remember Sonia Ben Ezra?
Yes.
Okay, so Sonia Ben Ezra and I, let's end with this. She's also from Tangiers, her family. She had to learn French. She wasn't a French Moroccan, she was a Spanish Moroccan. So her mother went to school with my mother. So CBC asks me to host Canada Day on Parliament Hill. And there has to be an English host and a French host. And most Quebecois don't want to be hosting Canada Day for CBC. It's just, culturally, they were just like, ask me to do Saint Jean Baptiste, but don't ask me to do that, right? But Sonia, she was a Spanish Moroccan Jewish person. What does she care? She was like, sure, I'll do it. So I tell my mother, I say, Ma, you're never going to believe this. I'm going to host Canada Day. And I'm doing it with a Ben Ezra, Sonia Ben Ezra, and I say her mother's name, and my mother just cries. And she says, could you imagine that? How could anyone imagine that there would be a Canada Day hosted by two Spanish Moroccan Jews from Tangiers? That's how crazy this country is.
Yeah, but that's awesome, right?
It was
that's
awesome.
Like groundbreaking. So.
Oh yeah, we had so much fun. We just referenced all our foods and everything we do and how we did it. And it was such an honor, to just go, this place can be so much more, But for me, the biggest piece has always been, how do we console ourselves to being the settlers, not the original people of this land, and how do we find a way to not look outward to other countries and say, hey, clean up your act, when the way we are here is it's a hypocritical thing to say because we have not cleaned up our personal act. And unfortunately, the death of these children hits people harder, but the death of the missing and murdered Aboriginal women didn't. Indigenous women, it didn't. And to me, that was sexism and racism in the same piece. And now we deal with infanticide. And that seems to drop the barrier. But what will it take? What bottom do we need to hit is the thing I worry about the most, because it all takes a toll on us spiritually as a country where it was unbelievable that two Spanish Moroccan Jews were standing there in front of 100,000 people on Parliament Hill. It was. But that's just the beginning of what we could be. And I just hope the work you're doing and others are doing, and Tom Wilson here in Hamilton is doing as well, that we can just continue on and do great work. So God bless you. I'm so happy to have met you, and you take care of yourself, okay?
All right. Oh, and by the way, they're becoming Nakuset into a play.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, the Siegel Center from Montreal. I worked with them on something called Children of God about 2 years ago, and Table d'Hôte. So they're in the process of getting funding, and then we're going to turn it into a play and bring it across Canada.
Fantastic.
It'll take some time. It'll take some time for it to happen. Apparently it takes 5 years, but that's my next project. Plus,
wonderful.
Saving the world.
Wonderful.
Okay.
All right, everybody, I'm Ralph Ben-Murgy. This is Not That Kind of Rabbi. If you're interested in this podcast, go to my website, not the website, go to the Patreon account. I've got some new blogs out, patreon.com/NTKR, and say hi. You can go to my Facebook page, Not That Kind of Rabbi. And if you're interested in spiritual counseling, I do that as well. And just go to my Gmail, ralphbenmurgy@gmail.com. Take care of each other. Nakuset, thank you so much for doing this, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.